Well, welcome back. In the opening session and in the first panel, we discussed the high political ambitions for the transatlantic relationship. And in this panel, we will ask the question, who is going to pay for all that? Can the United States and Europe afford these high ambitions which we have set for ourselves? And the most important question that I would like to pose to our panelists is where Europe and the United States is heading economically. We have distinguished group of panelists. On my right, Maciej Witucki, president of the Polish Telecom, Mark Allen from the International Monetary Fund, Mateusz Morawiecki, president of Bank Zachodni, WBK. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please go to auditorium hall.
Very good. Well, this was very helpful. This was not a message to us, it was a message to all those who are still enjoying coffee. And last but not least, Diogo Vasconcelos, distinguished fellow at Cisco. I would like to ask Mark Allen first if the worst is over in Europe and in the United States, and who is more in trouble, in fact? Are we more in trouble in Europe, or is the US more in trouble? Europe has seen an economic rebound earlier this year, but the problems around sorting out Greece and sorting out the future of the Eurozone are far from over. A lot of people predict that Greece will need to restructure its debt in 2 years' time. The facility that was created is a facility that is limited in time. It will run out in 3 years' time. So will Europe be able of handling her own problems? And is the double dip a realistic prospect in the United States? In the current circumstances, with the Federal Reserve preparing to enter another phase of quantitative easing later this year, and with lack of decisions about the Bush-era tax cuts. So who is more in trouble, Mark? Is it Europe or the United States?
Oh, Pawel, thanks very much. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this conference. There's plenty of misery to go around, so I'm not sure, I think there's, the answer is we all have a number of problems ahead. The world economy has had the worst shock in the last 80 years, and our view is that on the whole, the recovery is proceeding more or less as planned, but things are very fragile. For the world economy as a whole, we expect growth this year to be about 4.75%, and for and next year about 4.25%, a bit less next year. That, of course, is predicated on the emerging markets doing very well indeed. For the advanced economies, primarily Europe and the United States and Japan, the expected growth this year is just under 3%, and next year should be just over 2%. And within that, Europe is not doing as well as the United States. Now, if we go back to the start of the crisis, there was a program laid out of what to do about this crisis. And there were three pillars. One, fiscal policy was supposed to be supportive. Governments were to allow the deficits to increase so as to provide some support for demand and possibly stimulate the economy. The financial sector, it needed to be cleaned up quickly, and bank losses needed to be recognized and the banking system recapitalized as quickly as possible. And monetary policy was to remain loose to support the recovery of the banking system and to support demand. Now we're two and a half years further along the road, and we can have a sort of scorecard of how we're doing. Fiscal policy has indeed led to larger deficits, which is what Dr. Keynes ordered in terms of providing support for demand. What it hasn't yet led to in the industrial countries is to a renewed consumer spending, renewed support from demand from consumers. In the emerging markets, that has happened. We've seen increases in investment, we've seen increases in employment, and we see strong consumer demand. In the advanced countries, however, we're sort of stalled at the first stage. We see the fiscal support, but we don't yet see the consumers responding. And at the same time, the markets have become very worried about some of the size debts that we're dealing with here. But this increase in debt is quite normal after a banking crisis. And the issue, I think, is to separate those countries which have room for some fiscal expansion from those which really need to reduce the deficit immediately. On the financial side, the losses to the banking system are about $2.2 trillion. About 3/4 of that has been recognized. But a new shock has hit particularly European banks, which is concern about the value of sovereign paper on their balance sheets. We also face the new capital requirements and new regulatory requirements, which may make it more difficult for the banks. And finally, on monetary policy, there is not having got interest rates down to zero, there's not much ammunition left in monetary policy. And fiscal contraction could lead to problems on growth. These problems are usually, in the past, have been less when monetary policy has been able to respond to fiscal contractions. At the moment, however, monetary policy has nowhere else to go. So the bottom line is that the growth is slow. There are a number of problems ahead. Will there be a double-dip recession? Well, if growth is at the 1–2% level for some time, though our central scenario is that we don't have 2 consecutive periods of negative growth, it's not impossible. So I'd say there's probably a sort of 1 in 5 chance that we will see either in the US or Europe a double dip here. Pawel,